Hello and welcome back to the People of Sparks. We just wrapped up chapter 4, but tucked in between chapter 4 and chapter 5 is an unnumbered chapter. It's kind of snuck in here, kind of secretly, and it's titled The First Town Meeting. I want you to find me on page 45, please, if you're following along in your book. While Lena slept, the 3 town leaders were holding a meeting. They sat at a table in the tower room of the town hall, which looked out over the plaza. Mary's hands were clasped tightly in front of her. Ben scowled, his gray eyebrows bunched together, deepening the 2 lines between them. Wilmer pulled nervously on one ear and looked, sorry, I thought he was going to tug nervously on his beard. Did you see that? He tugged nervously on his ear. Oh my goodness. And looked from Mary to Ben and then back to Mary. They can't stay here, said Mary. There are too many of them. Where would we put them? How would we feed them? Yes, said Wilmer, but where can they go? No one spoke. They had no answer for that question. Outside the settlement of Sparks, the empty lands stretched for miles and miles in all directions. They could go up to Pine Gap, said Wilmer, maybe. Mary snorted and shook her head. That would be ridiculous, she said. That's at least 2 weeks' walk away. How could these feeble people travel that far? How could they carry enough food with them? Where would they get food unless we emptied our storehouse and gave them everything? Wilmer nodded, knowing that she was right. The people of Sparks knew only of 3 other settlements, that they'd heard that from the roamers, that those places were smaller and poorer than Sparks. Their inhabitants wouldn't want extra mouths to feed either. The 3 of them gazed out of the window and down at the moonlit plaza, filled with strange sleeping people from a city under the earth. 400 of them, with no food, no possessions to speak of, and nowhere to go. What I fail to understand, said Ben, is why this particular misfortune has happened to us. He paused, looked up into the air to his left and frowned. This was a habit of his. He seemed to need a pause and a frown every now and then to put together his thoughts. Wilmer and Mary had gotten used to waiting through these pauses. I don't see that we deserve it, Ben went on after a few seconds, having labored as diligently as we have. And just when we were starting to prosper at last, after so many years of, well, adversity is a mild word for it. The others nodded, thinking of the hard years. There had been winters when people shivered in tents and ate chopped up roots and shriveled nuts. There had been years of drought and plagues of tomato worms and devastating crop failures that meant people had nothing to eat for months but cabbage and potatoes. There had been times when people had to work so hard to stay alive that they sometimes died just from being too tired to go on. No one wanted to go back to those times. So what do we do? Said Mary. If they can't stay and they can't go, what's the right thing to do? The others sat silent. Well, there's the Pioneer, said Wilmer, as a temporary solution. True, said Ben. Ah, a good thought, said Mary, and Wilmer beamed. So what about this? Mary went on. We'll let them stay at the Pioneer. We'll give them water and food. We do have some extra in the storehouse. In exchange, they work. They help in the fields. They help with the building. They do whatever there is to do. We'd have to teach them how. As far as I can see, they know nothing. After a while, when they're stronger and when they know better how to get along, they can move on. They can set up their own village somewhere else. We'll have to watch them carefully if we let them stay, said Ben. They're strange. We don't know what they might do. Well, they seem fairly ordinary to me, said Mary, except for the business about living in a cave. You believe that? Said Ben. Mary shrugged. The question is, shall we let them stay? How long would we have to keep them? Asked Wilmer, before they're ready to go. I don't know, maybe 6 months? Let's see. It's the end of flowering now. Mary counted out the months on her fingers. Shining, burning, browning, cooling, falling, chilling. They could stay through the summer and fall seasons and leave at the end of chilling. Isn't that an interesting way that they have decided to describe their months? Shining, burning, browning, that's summer. Cooling, falling, chilling, that's fall or autumn. And now they're saying that they could stay summer and fall, but then they'll have to leave. That would mean that they're out on their own for winter, Wilmer pointed out. That's right, said Ben. Are you suggesting that we should keep them even longer? We'll be stretching ourselves to keep them at all. They fell silent, considering this. Finally, Mary spoke. Shall we let them stay for 6 months then, she said, and teach them as much as we can? No one really liked this idea. They thought of the food their refugees would need, which would mean less for their own people, and the bother of teaching them all the skills that they would need to have to survive on their own. Each one, Mary, Wilmer, and especially Ben, wished that the unfortunate cave people would simply vanish. But they weren't going to vanish, and the leaders of Sparks knew that they must, for the sake of their consciences, do the right thing. They wanted to be wise, good leaders, unlike the leaders of the past whose terrible mistakes had led to the disaster. So they would be open-minded. They would be generous. With this in mind, the 3 leaders voted. Mary voted yes, the cave people should stay. Ben voted yes, reluctantly. Wilmer voted yes. So it was agreed. They would give them a place to stay. They would help them for 6 months. After that, the strangers would have to take care of themselves. Mary, Ben, and Wilmer shook hands on this agreement, but none of them said out loud what they were thinking. That even after 6 months, the people of Ember would be hard-pressed to start a town. The founders of Sparks had known carpentry and farming, and even so it had taken them 2 years just to build rough shelters and to get the rocks out of the fields. They had known how to manage animals and build good soil, but their animals sometimes died of disease. And hunger sometimes their animals died of disease and hunger in the many years when the crops failed. They had known to expect harsh weather, wolves and bandits, and still they suffered losses from all 3. The town leaders knew in their hearts that in this vast, empty country, there were 1,000 dangers the people of Ember did not understand, and that they would never be able to take care of themselves. Wow. That's an awfully grim outlook, isn't it? But the 3 leaders of the village of Sparks have decided to basically adopt these 400 people, feed them and teach them and house them in exchange for their work, for their labor. Interesting. I don't know where this is headed. Are you ready to find out? Join me in chapter 5 in the very next video. Let's see what's going on in the village.